Well, hello and welcome to Airversity's Drone Pilot Hangar. It's been a while since we've seen everyone, but we are back. And can't believe it's February, almost March 2024, but we've got plenty more of these coming this year, one per quarter. So looking forward to covering some amazing topics that are of interest to us folks who are Part 107, and either those that either are flying now or would like to fly in the future. And that's what Airversity is here for. We are here to prepare the professional pilot for operations. Well, let's get right to it. Tonight, we've got an incredible guest with us tonight, Michelle Duquette. Michelle is a dear friend of Airversity's and has just done an amazing job of providing such incredible perspective in the industry and being a voice. So let me tell you a little bit about her, and I'm going to let her go a little bit more in depth, but she's an experienced leader in aviation systems and operational and strategy. She leads the unmanned and space portfolios at the MITRE Corporation, their Center for Advanced Aviation Systems Development. And of course, if you don't know, MITRE is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the FAA. And not all of MITRE, but this particular piece of operation. But she really engaged with leadership across the FAA, all of their lines of business to really facilitate enterprise solutioneering. So really, representing a perspective of what's going on in industry, so that we ensure that there's a lot more, collaborative solutions or solutioneering going on, because this is what makes this work. In addition, she also serves as the Department of Defense co-chair of the UAS Science and Research Panel, where she represents DoD interest in federal unmanned integration research and leads the U.S. executive branches and research sharing workshops. So she definitely has her finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry. So tonight we've got Michelle on to talk to us about where the industry is going and how to be prepared. But I'm going to turn it over to her and let her introduce herself with some additional perspective.
Thank you, Bronwyn. And as always, I really enjoy our time together. I love the perspective that you bring. It always makes me think, and I really enjoy that diversity of thought that we end up having in our conversations. A little about me. I've been at MITRE for about 23 years now. Prior to that, I was an aircraft dispatcher for the airline. So I grew up in the operations field. Since coming to MITRE, I've had quite an education on the other side of the fence, and I've come to have a lot of respect for how our government enables and sustains the kind of architecture and infrastructure that's necessary to keep our aviation system safe. There's a lot going on back there. So what I'm hoping to bring to the table today, to our discussion, is a little bit of that insight, some context around how we continue to enable the FAA to do its job, knowing that we have a domain that is probably the most rapid pace I've ever experienced. We're in the next revolution of
Yeah.
aviation.
Hmm.
So I'm hoping that we continue to strive for balance so that we can still make progress, but in a safe environment.
Absolutely. I often say that when you think about aviation, this is the first time in a real long time that we've had any innovation that the average person can touch.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's either big companies or defense companies or companies or NASA and also the defense companies. And you've got to have a certain level of education and experience to even get in the door for some of those discussions. But this is the first time like everyday people are having a chance to learn new skills,
Mhm.
gain certifications and be a part of one of the biggest revolutions and evolutions in this industry. Tonight also with me, On the other end of asking questions will be Cheryl Contreras. Cheryl is the president of Airversity, which encompasses both Airversity Drone Pilot Academy as well as the new Air Echo, which are drone services and data analytics. But I'll start us off. Um, Michelle, what innovative concepts is your team currently prioritizing to advance in the drone industry?
So as you've already kind of introduced MITRE, it's a not-for-profit company that manages federally funded research and development centers for the government. So therefore, many of our priorities are closely aligned with our government sponsors, right? So we work in that space that the FFRDC regulation describes as close in. So sometimes we're focusing on like large scale challenges that are within the government processes themselves, helping them help themselves. But more often than not, we're working on like multi-dimensional problem spaces that have more than one causal factor, that have these tentacles of dependencies and nuances that are characteristics of complex systems of systems. That's usually where my portfolio lives. Um, so some specifics of things that we're focusing on, that we're prioritizing. One example is math-based methods for analyzing radio frequency effects of industry detect and avoid, detect and mitigation systems on the various elements on an airport, within an airport infrastructure.
Hmm.
Another project is developing smart algorithms and some AI enhancements to assess small UAS collision risk with crewed aircraft across all of the classes of airspace in the National Airspace System. A third example would be decomposing the operational certification on the regulatory side of the FAA to lay out a progression of new component considerations designed for autonomous aircraft of the future,
Mm,
starting with the eVTOLs, or the electric
yeah.
takeoff and landing aircraft. But I mean, above all, our mission is to serve the public good. That's our bottom line.
Mhm.
So we also partner with, and directly with, state, local, tribal, territorial governments separately, with
Mm,
the acknowledgement from the FAA that we're out there helping them help themselves to communicate better with the government, with the FAA when it's time for them to look for an approval or get their safety management system in place, or whatever. Um, we're helping these uh, state, local, tribal, territorial governments accelerate their UAS and AAM integration efforts. We're connecting them with one another, to our government and industry colleagues. Um, we really have found that driving that diversity of thought and leading to collaboration across them is extremely effective. We also connect our labs. We have we've just recently introduced what we're calling a virtual reality immersion lab,
mm,
where basically you get in, you put the goggles on, and you're now flying an eVTOL over Los Angeles, and we're able to introduce all kinds of nuances into the the profile or the scenario. And doing things like that, it allows us to kind of stretch the boundaries, right? To what if we put this policy in place at this time with these boundaries or these guidelines? What does that do to the performance of this aircraft? What does that do to the general public? And the FAA and industry are able to use the outputs of
Hmm.
these kinds of exercises as meaningful inputs for how they're doing their business planning or planning policy, basically as they make their decisions on what the future is going to look like for themselves.
Wow. One of the things that I have noticed is that there are so many different efforts around the country from different folks, private sector, school, academia, and everybody's doing, either a drone center or a training center or, some kind of innovation center. Do you find that there probably eventually will need to be one clearinghouse other than the FAA, but because they regulate, the airspace and the regulations, but one place where we all go for commonality in training, maybe not so much innovation because that's, very organic, so that people are not like all over the place and that this person's doing this with eVTOLs and it's like, well, that's not really the right interpretation.
I actually don't. I think that the diversity is what drives the innovation for us. So it's helpful that
Mhm.
we've got very different focuses and
Mm.
very different research, or it's
Mhm.
similar research with a different driver, and it helps us flesh these things out. So
Got it.
this, a little bit later, we'll probably talk about standards,
Yeah.
and standards apply to training as well.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump here into number 2. With the progression towards BB loss and autonomy, what strategies should we adopt to address the critical issue of cybersecurity with drones and counter drone technology? And is remote ID the first step? And what do you think about this whole idea of drones and flying around and the security of it all?
Well, we know that it is critical that our security partners are comfortable with drone implementation.
Yeah.
Um, Remote ID is certainly a first step towards an important level of information sharing, and continue even in its broadcast form, and continuing to strive towards a network remote ID solution is still a logical strategy. Um, the Department of Defense has implemented what they're calling the Blue UAS program to accelerate federal acquisition of cyber secure small UAS,
Mhm.
COTS. It accelerates putting these commercial off-the-shelf assets into the hands of the warfighter.
Hmm.
The DoD's Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, they stood this program up, and then they kept going.
Mhm.
So they've provided a framework now for developers to address that supply chain challenge, and it's for both government and industry supporting the defense community, so that they have, identified a list of critical components, subcomponents, software that can be used in DoD applications. On the other hand, AUVSI, the Association for Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International,
Mhm.
so AUVSI, in partnership with DIU, developed what they are calling green UAS.
Mhm.
Their intent is to offer that same level of cybersecurity and supply chain risk management to the non-defense drone community. So now we've got the defense community and the non-defense community that are benefiting from this cyber shoring up. For
Wow.
now, I mean, that's an excellent strategy
Yeah.
to make progress in today's world.
Mhm.
Addressing counter UAS, I'd say the very first thing that I'd recommend is carefully read the recently published Counter UAS Aviation Rulemaking Committee report.
Mhm.
So the Aviation Rulemaking Committee, or the ARC, just
Yeah.
recently published uh, its recommendations to the
Mhm.
FAA. Please read it and provide your feedback back to the FAA. They want to hear. They want to hear from us, all of us. I mean, there's a realization that counter UAS doesn't always necessarily mean shooting something out of the sky. It doesn't necessarily mean always there needs to be a takedown, because in many cases, it's really only just going to require detection in order to be able to effectively address this non-compliant drone operator.
Mm-hmm.
I was an ARC member myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll tell you, Bronwyn, I am extremely proud of that ARC's leadership.
Mm-hmm.
They provided probably the most diverse ARC membership I have ever seen. We had members from national sports leagues, counter UAS system developers, the tribal nations,
Mm-hmm.
law enforcement agencies. Even the ACLU was there, because drones touch everyone today.
They sure do.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'll share with you that these folks perform to the highest level of professionalism, addressing very, very different perspectives and concerns, as you can imagine.
I can imagine.
And it resulted in really long days, but they produced a very well thought out set of recommendations for the FAA. So, in my opinion, this is a great model to follow, an excellent strategy for how we address the future of transportation in general.
Wow, that's impressive. Because that's a lot of work. I mean, that is a lot, and there's so many different opinions and perspectives that have to be represented, and trying to make sure that everybody is heard and that there's some kind of common ground after is it's a challenge. This is new for everybody.
Well, that's the thing. We're in this world now, this environment of UAS, or just uncrewed operations, and it's bleeding over into sectors that it's beyond aviation.
Hmm.
And so we have to consider, we are, you're not in Kansas anymore. We have to consider the concerns, the needs, the capacities of
Right.
these other, they're stakeholders now.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Michelle, you touched on so many great things, and really, we're talking about really high level things when you're getting into cybersecurity, BV loss, autonomy, um, all this growth, right, within the UAS industry, and it's really hard to keep up with it. I think everybody on the call here today really knows it's every day you're learning something new. Um, So with that said, there's already tests in place like Part 107, right? And we've all heard about Part 108 coming out. Do you think that there should be a comprehensive test plan that should be implemented for ongoing development of Part 107 and the upcoming Part 108 regulations?
So, Cheryl, that is a really hard question to answer with any specificity. Um, Today, we've got like the beginnings of meaningful standards coming out of ASTM. The expertise behind these standards recommendations runs very deep technically. And that shows us how really complicated this problem space actually is. I have to say, though, I don't think we're close to done yet. So I don't think we're in a place to develop a comprehensive test plan quite yet. There's still only there's a cadre of industry who have the experience to really unpack all the details of what ASTM has taken great pains to put together, and understand the implications on a system holistically. So this makes rulemaking really hard, right? It's a lot more challenging for the FAA to um, be able to consider all of the implications and apply all of the details of those standards within the next couple of years.
Mhm.
So I'll offer this. Um, Instead of looking for a comprehensive plan quite yet, comprehensive test plan quite yet, I'd offer, do your best to align with the ASTM standards as they're written today. And it's not an easy ask.
Mhm.
They're very complex. So reach out to others in the industry, including the trade associations like AUVSI or Commercial Drone Alliance, others. Look to them for interpretation and guidance on how the rest of the community is interpreting those standards recommendations. FAA has a bunch of webinars. Attend some of those webinars and attend their symposiums. And seriously, ask them your questions directly. They've got phone numbers that they publish. They stand up help desks at all these conferences. They want to hear from you. Stay plugged in the best you can. The intent here is to help you make investments based on the best intelligence that's available to you. Once the NPRM comes out for Part 108, you'll have a better resource to align a plan with at that point, and then it'll be a couple of years before the rule comes out.
Huh.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for those resources. Sometimes I think it's hard for pilots to find places to reach out to, and then people just within the industry overall. Again, going back to the ever-changing industry that we're in and having to educate yourself every day on that growth, really. And so with that, touching back to everything we've kind of talked about, is current policy able to keep pace with the rapid innovation that we have in the UAS industry? And if so, where should we prioritize our engagement with any frontline operators that we have to ensure, effective policy making moving forward?
So I'm going to defer talking about policy right yet, especially while the FAA is in the throes of working the Part 108 rule. At MITRE, we do work very closely with the agency, and the work that we do helps them make decisions on how they're going to direct their policy. So I'm gonna back off of that question.
Yeah, I think inquiring minds definitely, are
Yeah.
always chomping at the bit on that. And to piggyback on Cheryl's question, what kind of strategies do you think we can employ to achieve, like, this widespread adoption of UTM, which is supposed to, be this umbrella that, helps all of us make sure that we're integrating effectively and safely? Do you think that when it comes to the average operator, whether it's a company or, individuals, how should we be thinking about that to be prepared for UTM and how it will be rolled out?
Well, I don't think it's a linear path, right?
Mhm.
We're we're in this situation where we're having to drive the car as we build it.
Yeah.
So, each time a bulb goes out or the radio doesn't work, we have to pull over and we have to discover what's wrong. We have to learn from that. We have to adjust, adapt, and then get back on the road.
Mhm.
So programs like the operational evaluation that's going on in Dallas
Mhm.
right now, the NTAP, that's near-term approval process for UTM services,
Mhm.
that's going on right now. These are great paths to helping us realize facets of UTM services sooner.
Mm.
We've also been able to build on the learnings from partnerships like the Beyond program,
Mhm.
right? Like
Mhm.
all of that extensive research that NASA and industry have done over the last several years. And also from what states are doing on their own, and states, local, tribal, territorial, they're taking the initiative themselves. They, in some cases, are building entire infrastructures. The states are looking for economic drivers from the drone industry.
Mhm.
And, like I said earlier, we've all got to keep learning together. And I think that's the key strategy.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think we're all waiting for that. And I think that when it comes to planning, as I'm running a company, as we're running companies here, how do we plan? As we look at forecasts for the next 5 years, whether we're talking to investors or planning equipment and budgets and opportunities, And everybody's like, is this going to continue to be a place or an industry where I should invest my time, my resources, um, in trying to understand how we will manage with the complexity of these tools, which should help make it easier. But this will be interesting to see how this shakes out for the smaller companies and of course the larger entities, especially
Yeah,
as we get to autonomy. Um, and
agreed.
but there's so many things that we've got to get right. When you think about the space program, um, it started off at it was crawling, and we launched, and we had a few mishaps, but everybody was safe initially. Then we went to different craft, and unfortunately in 1986 that didn't necessarily work out too well, but we've learned from those experiences, and so it will be interesting to see how we adjust now that we have an operation that is heavily civilian based,
Hmm.
and small company based than what we've been, used to and accustomed to in the past. Um, and so, if given the opportunity, and I'm going to make this our last question because we can talk to you all night long. um, if given the opportunity, I'll let Cheryl, if there's another perspective she'd like to ask as well, or a point she'd like to make. If given the opportunity to enact immediate change within the industry, what alterations would you make to enhance our functionality and efficiency?
I love these if I was queen for a day questions. So first, I'd modify the FAA safety risk management framework.
Mm,
We have been um, we have been testing, learning. Um, we've been learning from our international partners, right? The SORA came out. We've applied these qualitative assessments, but we actually need to dig deeper than that for the United States.
mhm,
I think that to clearly understand what a target level of safety means for these aircraft and the level of mitigations in place for operations across the NAS, these things are important for us to get consistent. And not when they're not consistent, we risk subjectivity.
mm,
And subjectivity is not a good uh, it's not a good element of safety.
mhm,
So as we're transitioning into a future of non-government services, right, shared services and
right.
infrastructure, safety has to go beyond subjectivity. It has to be absolute.
Mhm,
So that would be the first thing that I would do. The
right.
second thing I would do is I would immediately employ collaborative decision making tenets, things that are it's a proven precedent that the legacy aviation community developed back in the early 90s based on information exchange, operational integration practice, and innovation supporting traffic management. And I would apply those tenets to the uncrewed community.
Mhm,
So back in the early 90s, the airlines didn't trust one another either.
mhm,
They didn't share information.
mhm,
And a grassroots effort, and this is how old I am, I was there, brought the aircraft dispatchers and the traffic managers from the FAA together to basically try and figure out why these problems were continuing to happen, why the delays, why the um, inefficiencies, the lack of predictability. And, when type A personalities, operational
mm,
personalities get together,
mhm,
great, great things happen.
right.
And so I'll fast forward to today. The airline industry benefits from something called CDMNet, where they've established their own network with their own data elements and their own language for how they manage the flow of traffic throughout the national airspace system. And they do this together in a collaborative fashion. I think we can get there with the UAS community.
Mm-hmm.
They're where the airlines were in the early 90s. They're unsure how to trust one another. They're unsure how to share information
Mm-hmm.
and, what kind of value would come out of that sharing. So that would be the second thing that I would do is I would establish those principles.
Interesting. Very
Um,
interesting.
I think I'd then shift our focus away from talking about data explicitly and really start focusing on information.
Yeah.
Um, we tend to talk in circles when we talk about data, and everybody uses the same words, and they don't necessarily mean the same thing.
Mm,
Um, I think that if we are able to communicate what intelligence is meaningful to each of us for the decisions that we have to make, then we can walk that back to find the data where that information is derived from. So I'd shift our thinking and the way we talk to each other about getting the kinds of information we need to make the decisions that we need to make.
That's interesting. I was just having a conversation with someone, and they were asking me about data for, an upcoming test program. And I said, well, is it just telemetry or is it um, data around, the work that's being done? Because there's so much. There's the data from a communications perspective. How, what does that look like? Is that
Mhm.
clear? Is it, what are the challenges? And again, telemetry. And I mean, there are a lot of different pieces of, there's weather. There are a lot of different pieces of data, connection with other aircraft. Is it a public safety situation? Is it, just corporate inspection work, ag, and then once we get to passenger eVTOLs, that is then opens up a whole new can of worms for us. Cheryl, anything you'd like to add?
I would just like to say, Michelle, I wish you could have seen the huge smile that went across my face when you first mentioned, safety risk management. Because I didn't originally start my career within the UAS industry. I started in general aviation, working towards my PPL. So as I've progressed in my career, I've definitely taken general aviation and the safety mind there and kind of dragged it through. Even maybe to a fault at sometimes, right? Being too safe,
Mhm. Mhm.
stopping operations and being out in field. In a previous role, I led a test program for a DA program. So I was flying 4 to 5 days a week, and it was rough. You want to watch all your pilots, make sure it's all in place, right? And so I've always carried that through where safety should be number one. And we're kind of in the wild, wild west when it comes to the UAS industry and really what we should be putting into it. So, operating manuals and emergency procedures, that was all in my bucket, and I built them
Mhm.
out and I built them to a thick booklet. So,
That's
I
awesome.
definitely sympathize with you on that. And like I said, if you could have seen my smile, it would have lit up this whole screen right now. I was so happy to hear
That's
you say that.
fantastic. Well, we know that the FAA has been they've really been making progress on how to even define risk in in the uncrewed environment. It's not an easy thing. This is something that they had to start over with because the policy just didn't apply,
Mhm.
right? We couldn't apply the safety management system rubrics to these aircraft. The likelihood and it just didn't work.
Right.
So they have spent a great deal of energy thinking and research over the past decade, refining what it means to assess risk of uncrewed aircraft flying in the national airspace, various classes of airspace.
Mhm.
We still have a ways to go, and that's where I would love to be able to build off of what they've already done, and then get us to that more quantitative measure.
Hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Cheryl. And Michelle, we really appreciate you being on the first Drone Pilot Hangar of 2024. This is incredible information and something that I think adds so much value to our conversation out in the field. I have one announcement from Airversity, and that is March 16th is Compliance Day for your remote ID. So if you haven't gotten yours yet, I know there's been a long wait. I waited for a long time to get mine, and people are not sure, which units should I buy. I'm now getting, the emails with like, hey, try ours. It's this discount. So, but just make sure that you are, compliant. If you have any questions about that, reach out to us. You can find us on social media, on X, as well as on Instagram. Ask us any questions. You can find us also on LinkedIn on our Airversity page, and let us know what questions you have about readiness for not for Part 107, but for remote ID, but for Part 107 as well. So we want to thank Michelle for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you all in May. And thanks to our guests for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.
Take
Bye.
care.